Monsieur Johnson. I'm speaking at the Alton College Retreat Center at the Dervish Healing Order Conference in July 1, 2024. This is the first day of 3 days dealing with one of my books, or three of my books each day. The books for today were Big Tales, Murshid, my magnum opus, and the collected poems, wet, of Monsieur Johnson. Toward the one, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls, who form the embodiment of the Master, the Spirit of Guidance. Beloved ones of God, when I was working on this book, Murshid, people were always asking me, tell us some Murshid stories. The book was 39 years in preparation, and I always said, no, I'm waiting for the book. I'm going to put them in the book. And so I want to present today 11 stories from Murshid and regale you with 8 or 9 fragments of poems, also sort of stories, because I warned against reading. So the only kind of reading I will present is kind of a quotation here and there. I'm going to start with Big Tales. And the story connected with Big Tales is its literary history, rather than the stories. It's 500 pages of stories. But what I want to present to you is the literary history. It was published in 2015. I compiled the stories and gave titles to all the stories, but the author of this book is Hazrat Inayat Khan, because all these stories came from the 12 volumes of the Sufi Message. The Einstein Academy, me, published it. Both this book and Murshid began about the same time. When I was early in my Muridship, I was intensely interested in the 12 volumes of the Sufi Message. And from an early date, I started copying the stories from the Sufi Message. And I ended up with about a ream paper, 500 pages of stories, which I submitted to Sharif, who was the editor for Sufi Order. And Sharif looked at the manuscript and made a selection, and the Sufi Order published Sharif's edition as Tales Told by Hazrat Inayat Khan in 1980. And there was a second edition in 1991, but it was small. It was a small selection that Sharif had made. And from the beginning, I wanted all of them. And so, by the way, I received royalties for that smaller collection, published by the Sufi Order, and credit from Pir Vilayat Khan and Sharif Graham in the pages of the book. Did I mention the second edition came out in 1991? That was called Tales Told by Hazrat Inayat Khan. In 2015, I published Big Tales, the entire ream 458 pages, with titles by me. That's all I'll say about Big Tail. Murshid came out in 2006. Like I said before publication, people were constantly asking me, tell us some Murshid stories. And I declined. For this talk, I had to reduce the list of hundreds of stories in this book to 11 to come in under a half an hour time. And the first story is a story that shows how Murshid dealt with professionals who he was trying to impress with his credentials. And it segues into a piece by Swami Rama, from a book by Swami Rama, which is related to the first by the drug Soma, which is the psychedelic drug, legendary psychedelic drug used in Vedic rituals. I knew Swami Rama from the old days, back in the 70s. A professor named Elmer Green was researching yogis. And Swami Rama was a very high-level yogi who, as I recall, had the ability to stop his heart and kind of go into hibernation. And Elmer Green brought him to this convocation where I was also invited to lead dances. And the second opportunity I had to connect with Swami Rama was in Boston. And I won't go into that story, but anyway, story number one concerns parapsychology professor Charles C. Tart. He was on a TV show called Altered States of Consciousness. Murshid was impressed. He wrote Tart February 8, 1970, and the following is the flow of the letter. Murshid told Tart that he, Murshid, had all the experiences that Tim Leary was reporting. He described Leary's experiences as being, quote, second plane of 7 planes of consciousness as described by mystics, unquote. What are the 7 planes of consciousness? Well, I wasn't sure, so I Googled it, and it came up kind of goofy. Came out 7 planes are physical plane, astral plane, mental plane, causal plane, buddhi plane, spiritual plane, divine plane. Sorry to give you wrong information. Then segues and mentions the dances that he is creating. He describes his process involved in creating the dances as, quote, a combination of dream and super states of consciousness which manifest on 3 higher levels of consciousness before they come to outer form. Murshid goes on to say that his reports of psychic events upon the return from the Orient in 1962 were totally rejected by psychic researchers. These details suggest that, quote, that the title of the poem, The Rejected Avatar, was his personal story. Further, Murshid says, part of my work has been a search for Soma. And Soma, as I mentioned, is a legendary intoxicating beverage consumed by Vedic priests during Vedic rituals. Murshid says in this letter he's attended ceremonials put on the Arya Samaj group, quote, where natural derivatives were employed to produce a supermundane effect through the smoke coming from chemical action. Oh, bad boy.
Need a refill?
I think Murshid means Leary's experiences were on the astral plane. And wait, I'm losing my place here. Reading this talk about Murshid using smoke and intoxicating smoke caused me to remember something I read in Swami Rama's book, Living with the Himalayan Masters, which has a chapter on Soma. Swami Rama describes Soma as a creeper. Thank you. He and the herbologist that visited him brought some of the creeper. And they tried some. The herbologist started chanting and singing and threw off his clothes and started dancing. He shouted that he was Lord Shiva and asked the astonished assembled students of Swami Rama to bring him his wife, Parvati, because he wanted to make love with her. The effect this had on Swami Rama, he had a headache. Story number 2. This is also similar in that it's a case of Mershid trying to make contact with someone, a professional person named F. Clive Ross, who was the publisher of a scholarly journal. And Clive Ross lived in London, and the journal was called Studies in Comparative Literature. Some of his contributors included Frithjof Schumann, Syed Hussein Nasr, and Marco Pallis. One of Schumann's 10 books is entitled Sufism. One of Nasr's many books is The Heart of Islam. And Marco Pallis wrote 36 books, including one about Tibet called Lamas in Mountains or something like that. I didn't fill in the blank here. And Mershid was already corresponding with Syed Hussein Nasr. Mershid introduced himself to Clive Ross in his first letter, March 14th, 1969, writing, "The writer is both a real Sufi, mystic, and a real disciple of Zen. He is also a disciple of the late Swami Ramdas of South India." There was no answer from Clive Ross. Mershid wrote again and sent $42 for 3 subscriptions of the scholarly journal, along with the words, quote, "I am very satisfied with your publication, but I am not satisfied with letters never answered, inquiries spurned, and articles shunned." From this last bit, I got that Mershid had submitted scholarly articles for publication. Mershid continued, quote, "More money will be sent when I am considered a flesh and blood human being and not just a check writer." Quote, "The only existence I seem to have is when I write a check." Following this outburst was a page and a half describing Mershid's prowess in mysticism, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism. Mershid and I called on Clive Ross when we were in London after the Temple of Understanding conference in Geneva. It was a congenial visit. Clive Ross received us with English hospitality, and there was no mention of the above. Story number 3, the Lord's Prayer. There's an inscription, which is the Lord's Prayer. "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed by thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is," these are the key words, "for thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, amen." I was raised in the Presbyterian Church. I sang in the choir. I went to Sunday service. We said the Lord's Prayer as part of our ritual. Thursday, Sufi night, June 25th, 1968, Mershid talked about the Lord's Prayer in semantic terms. He said kingdom corresponds to the sphere of the jinn, and is where our term genius comes from. Sufis call this realm malakut. He said power corresponds to the world of the angels. Jabrut, in Sufi terms, is how the Sufis describe this realm. He said glory corresponds to the source, Lahu, in Sufi terms. These three words, kingdom, power, and glory, correspond respectively to inspiration for kingdom, love for power, and luminosity or light for glory. Story number 4. Nijinsky's daughter. Nijinsky is a famous Russian dancer who went crazy. At a dance class, April 19th, 1969, a Saturday, as was the usual day for the dance class, Mershid was teaching the Neptune walk, which has a concentration on the crown center. That made him think of a meeting he had with Nijinsky's daughter at a party. Mershid said, the daughter said, I can understand everything, but I cannot understand Papa. Mershid said, I can understand Papa. She said, tell me. Mershid told her, he said, and they became friends. Mershid explained Nijinsky's madness in terms of centers. Nijinsky was too much centered in his crown center, Mershid said, when he was dancing and went crazy. Isadora Duncan, another contemporary of Mershid's, Mershid said, was too much in her second chakra. Each were imbalanced in a different direction. Story number 5. Huston Smith. There's a little intro to this. When Mansour was an English professor at Northern Michigan University and married to Taj, the school invited the famous scholar of religion, Huston Smith, to give a lecture. The school authorities learned that Mansour knew about Huston Smith. I knew from his articles in Tim Lurie's Psychedelic Journal. Taj and I were delegated to host Huston Smith. Due to our prior familiarity with psychedelics, Taj and I greeted Huston Smith with an abundance of enthusiasm, as if encountering an old friend. With that intro, on with the story. Mershid and I were attending Huston Smith's class at UC Berkeley. He showed his documentary on Tibetan Buddhism, titled Requiem for Faith. The film is noteworthy because the monks produce overtones at the same time they produce tones in their chanting. Mershid offered to me what to me was a bizarre explanation. He said the sounds the monks made were produced the same way birds produce sounds in their chests. After the film, Huston asked us about other possible audiences for the film. I quickly volunteered, wanting so much to be helpful. We'll make an occasion for showing the film. Mershid quickly followed with, I have connections with the local Buddhists who brought Lama Govinda to town. We can possibly show your film to them. I tell this story to show the difference between an eager murid and the wisdom of the teacher. In my eagerness to please, I committed to something, make an occasion. Mershid, on the other hand, made no commitment, but offered to do something, show it to the local Buddhists. That was a teaching for me. Story number 6, how the student misunderstands for years the guidance given. I didn't get the full meaning of Mershid's advice years ago until I was working on this talk. It is July 5, 1969, and I'm struggling with my perennial question, what to do with my life? I was so full of the question which had preoccupied me for years.
At this time, I had no means of supporting myself after resigning my professorship at Northern Michigan University. My wife and child lived on aid-dependent children. Merchant had offered to pay me for secretarial work. He gave me money once, but never again. I think he decided, well, I'll just treat him to a lot of dinners instead of giving him money, which he did. Anyhow, I asked a question, made an appointment with Merchant, which you usually did, which you had to do, and asked him, what am I supposed to do? I was asking long term. He answered me short term. What followed was a whole page, which I don't want to read because it's a whole page, but it was a whole page of things that would help Merchant, that I could do for him at this moment. And my perennial question remained unanswered. My vision for the future did not include working without pay for Merchant the rest of my life. But yet, when I looked at this story in preparation for this meeting, I thought, gee, if I'd gotten the deep meaning of his advice, maybe I would still be working for him the rest of my life. Like, how many Indian gurus have disciples that have been forever with them, right? But anyhow, I left the interview dissatisfied. We continued onward with me attending to what needed to do. Then, the items that he mentioned. Story number 7. Details that would not be in anybody else's book. The book Merchant contains many comments Merchant made about me, which any other writer the writing would never include because they're about me. And they would probably look for comments about them. Sadi once said to me that all my writing was autobiographical, which is true. The following is from Merchant's letter to Paul Ress, the author of Zen Flesh and Bones and a fellow disciple of Hazrat Adat Khan, dated Jan 27, 1969. Merchant wrote, my esoteric secretary, Otis Johnson, Mansour, is not only going upstairs with me, he has the economic problem. Merchant was referring to my lack of money and the aid-dependent children I mentioned. He continued to reps. In the few hours we have together, he is able to accompany me on spiritual journeys. None of the, quote, experts and, quote, ladies have accepted, but we don't care anymore. That spoke about our close relationship. Then on March 26, 1969, on a Wednesday, Merchant said to me before I was off on my photojournalism trip to document Southwest United States communities like Lama, Drop City, and Libre, where Peter Coyote lived, quote, and when you go to New Mexico, you are me, articulating the pupil and teacher are one teaching. And when I was on my trip, he wrote Houston Smith, at times, Mansour seems almost like my reincarnation. I think Merchant said that because just as he co-authored a book about California with Luther Whitman, he recognized a similar impulse in me to write. Story number 8. When Merchant joined Vashisht and I in the Berkeley Hills to interview Tim Leary for the San Francisco Chronicle, from the book, it says, Leary seems annoyed by my first question. We took Merchant along with us, but myself and Merchant were over in Berkeley talking to Leary. What time do you go to bed at night, I asked him. Depends on how high we are, he answered. Quote, we tend to go to bed when we start coming down. I write my judgment. I feel he is an anachronism. continuing to ingest so much acid, the ravages showing on his face. I tell Murshid that judgment. Murshid answers me, he's got a good heart. Once more, Murshid says, he's a Neptunian type. This means he knows all the answers, but has difficulty manifesting the solutions. So the Nijinsky story and Leary both share a Neptunian tendency. Story number 9. Murshid describes in a few words the characteristics of the planets. And this is how we would typically talk when we were doing the walks. This is from a book on July 24th, 1968, early in the teaching. During a dance class tonight at Sheila's, Murshid says, the sun allows you to go directly to your goal. If you were the moon, you can follow others. Mars likes to take orders. For Saturn, every detail has to be right. If any detail is amiss, the whole thing is wrong. Jupiter has a broad view and is the executive type. The maitre d' would be Murshid's typical example of the Jupiter type. Mercury can hardly wait to finish one thing before going into the next. We remember Murshid's walk in the Mercury style. Venus is gentle and delicate. Story number 10. Dharma combat with Lama Govinda. December 9th, 1968. Murshid was building up a head of steam to meet Lama Govinda. In a week, Lama Govinda would have a meeting, and his local associate, Iru Price, would not let the audience sit on the floor or approach His Holiness. Infinite compassion was one of Lama Govinda's themes. Murshid mocked him by going on and on about finite compassion, the way he would. A local Buddhist, Reverend Neville Warwick, was not allowed even to attend Lama's meeting. A week before, Murshid was talking about challenging Lama Govinda to Dharma combat, in which the loser becomes the disciple of the winner. Quote, I'm not afraid of becoming his disciple, Murshid crowed. I'm tired of bowing down to somebody to please a crowd whose teacher is below me spiritually. I think that last statement shows that at this stage in his life, humility was not active in Murshid. Story number 11. Wuda on vacation with Murshid. September 1969.
Say who Buddha was.
I will. Henry James' characters used to go on an ocean voyage when some personal tragedy happened to them. When Pirvalaya eloped with my wife, Taj, a trip to see Murshid's Uncle Harry in Vancouver was proposed. Accompanying us on this journey was Saul Beredowski and his big, black, long-haired Labrador retriever, Wuda, who you've already been introduced to by Saul this morning. I had a clean 1966 Volkswagen van, which had the middle bench seat removed. A plywood platform has been installed with a mattress on top covered with a bedspread. You could sit with your back against the backrest of the back bench seat and stretch your legs forward. I was forced to endure outrage after outrage as the dog Wuda from time to time vomits, sheds black hair, tracks in mud, and comes in rain-soaked and shakes himself. It was a memorable trip, wonderful in all aspects, including getting to know Wuda.
and he sat on Murshid's lap with his head out the window for at least a third of the journey.
Beautiful. Okay, we're running time. I'm moving on to book 3 of today, the collected poems of Monsieur Johnson. The poems are divided into 8 sections. The idea is to present one poem or fragments from a poem, if it's long. So the first section is called Don't Search, Celebrate, from 1964. This is the psychedelic phase. Now, in another venue, I presented a poem from this period about moonlighting, bartending in Iowa. That comes later. But for you, I chose a love poem called Why Is It Lonely, Traveling Alone? There's a story in Homer. By the way, most of my poems are story poems. So even though I'm reading a poem, I'm telling a story in most cases. There is a story in Homer. I didn't read it in Homer, but somebody else read Homer and said what he said. How in the beginning, mankind had 4 arms and 4 legs. But then there was a division and mankind split apart. There are thousands of books which write about the subsequent imperfection taking her hand, but I want to be concerned with the perfection. In my art, we shall travel. I confess, I love what caresses me. Section 2, Sacred and Profane Poetry, 1969 to 70. I present only one stanza which is necessary to make the point, which is how I understood that I was receiving a transmission from Murshid. I suppose everyone has a different experience when they feel that the spirit of the teachers come to them. And I only share 4 lines because it's a longer poem, but the first 4 lines make the point. The poem is called Riding Through the Desert at Night. Dear Murshid, how do I know when you come? When I feel a shiver of bliss, my friend, I know you have arrived. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. Oh, there's a second poem. It's titled simply My Love. My love plays the guitar, and I do Spanish dances. She says, pick up your feet. I never miss a beat. We drink wine together, hold each other tight. She tells me a story. I turn out the light. About the time together we lived long ago, read each other poetry, watched the river flow. We have known each other since I saved her life. She was good to me, acted like my wife. We have known each other as long as songs were sung. I have been a singer. She has played the drum. I was once a pirate, she a lady fair. I knocked off her old man, began to stroke her hair. She didn't recognize me as fast as I'd have liked. It took a few more centuries before I did it right. You see, she's always played guitar. I've always been a dancer. Her music's been a melody that makes all hearts beat faster. Section 3. Poems from Mutu Kulanta Mutu, died before death, 1974. This poem, which came in a dream, I considered as God's answer to my deep longing to know her. It's called God Us to See the Way They All Came In. The way everything came in like the waves with the waves, and waves makes me cry. And when we put the sunset together, they all had their place. Even pulling them out of the river and burying them in the family plot, they all had their place. They were so happy to go, even though they were just a piece of glass and a tire full of mud. They were my great Aunt Clara and my grandfather Clem. The way everything came in, it was time for dinner. When it was time for dinner, like the waves, with the waves, in waves, makes me cry. The way they all come in, like the waves, in waves, they all come. I can't read my writing, because I had to copy the stanza. They all come, blah, 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 like cows would come for pasture, they all come in at sundown, like the waves, with the waves, in waves. Skipping 4 more stanzas in the interest of time to the last, which concludes in this poem. The way everything comes in, as I was sitting with my beloved, I was just a little jealous. They were all returning to be with her. There was no way to stop them. They were all part of her total picture, part and parcel now returning. They were all so obedient, and they couldn't get off the movement, yet they really had no choice. They just came in with the waves. They just came in on the waves. They were tired, and they weren't smiling, yet they came on just the same. It was that it was sundown, and the breath of life was gone. Section 4, Journal Poems, 1976. My wife Taj used to have the name Nikki after she had the name Carolyn. And I wrote a small poem that went like this. Before Taj was Taj, she was Nikki. Oh, this is the intro. Before that, she was Carolyn. Back in the day, I wrote a poem titled Nikki. I don't care, it don't even matter whom you're awakening with tomorrow, as long as you're with me, all day today, every day. It's significant that now, 7 years after she left with her Wyatt, I wrote another poem titled Nikki. The explicitly erotic parts are omitted. Like I told you before, words can't express it. Only this time, how I feel about you, all of the space you take up, and tonight, how I need to touch you and feel you respond. It goes on for 5 more lines. A missing detail from the Nikki Taj poems is that when I wrote our marriage ceremony, it did not contain the words, "till death do you part." Rather, I wrote that we would be together forever and eternity. And needless to say, considering the time it took to get over her departure, I meant those words. Section 5, 12 Wild Horses on the Road to New Mexico, 1996. This is a longer poem in the form of a story about reaping what you sow, in the form of emotions left on a road that you have to return over. 12 wild horses on the road to New Mexico. The highway between 3 points in Mule Creek joins Arizona and New Mexico. I took it on the way to Santa Fe, and I'm taking it on the way back to Tucson. Now I understand why this saint from North Africa, his name is Alawi, always took the same road into town and back home again. 12 wild horses meeting me, just like all day. I'm meeting my thoughts deposited on the road, along the road, on the trip over. Al-Alawi, all the time thinking of God, meets his joy on the way back home. While me, an agony of anger and upset keeps me reacting, stomach tight, emotion rising like a stomach ache. I have passed the very large array on the plains of Augustine. There are 28 giant radio telescopes weighing 230 tons each, blocking the ancient Longhorn driveway, stretching all the way in a Y shape from Horse Springs and Datil, 125 miles, all the way to Magdalena, which peaked in 1919, when 150,000 sheep and 21,677 cattle for the last time walked to the railroad at Magdalena. I think that's enough. That story goes on for 39 more lines. Section 6. Poems from the passionate shepherd to his love and her answers. Undated by request of the woman. This poem has a section by the passionate shepherd, me, and then the answer from the woman, his love. There are 33 parts. The first two, a call and response, are presented here. Number 1, a telegram to my love. I'm in a time warp, reading Neruda's poetry, listening to Joe Cocker, looking everywhere for you, remembering something of your atmosphere, a lightness, navegando en la espuma, Spanish for sailing on the foam. Nymph, listen to one who can't see anyone but you. There are church bells to be washed in my kitchen. A hair tie needs to be removed from my hair. Someone has to smudge the bed with sage. Lead me as if blind to your counsel. His love replies, how can I turn away those baskets of flowers? How can I say goodbye to the love in your eyes? Looking into your eyes, I travel to unknown places of the mind. I blossom under the warmth of your smile. I open to the welcome in your voice. Under the sky of your eyes, I'm a flower unfurling its petals. My whole being turns to you. But I must step back, she says. You were part of my ancient memories. You are an enchantment. I must go back. It could be so easy to step into that world filled with baskets of fragrant flowers. But I am being called. Those sweet voices that have filled my heart forever, they are calling me back. Section 7 is a song written by Robert Best using the words, a phrase really, the heart is an ocean and love has no boundaries, that appears in the beginning of Murshid. Heart is an ocean, love has no boundaries. Love has no boundaries and has no shoreline. The counterpoint to that is, through thy all-pervading light in space. The last stanza goes, heart is an ocean, love has no boundaries, and has no shoreline, overlaid by Allah, 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 Amen. Section 8, last one. This is it. It's called Birthday Poem, 2016, and it has an inscription. Murshid's letters to Barkat Ali. He wrote September 23, 1969. Murshid wrote, in a few days, there will be the celebration of my being 73 years old. And the body has changed very little in vitality, vigor, or health. The mind, on the contrary, continues to grow and to enter into states of consciousness much more universal than personal. And my poem continues, that's the inscription of the poem. I'm 73 today. It's been like a play. That's life I'm talking about. In fact, I spent my birthday erecting the set for the opera Rigoletto. Intanto leggo questa rivista, which is to say in Italian, in a little while I'm going to buy a magazine. I said this to Brian today at work. Brian is always greeting me in French with bonjour, bonjour, and I've been pretty consistently answering him in Spanish. The Italian today threw him off. This show business is a funny business. Working, not working, I love it. Bruce Dern introduced me to Stacy Keach in the front row at the Loft Film Festival by saying, "We made a movie together." It was World Gone Wild. I don't know. I'm tired of it. The set of Rigoletto, I don't look forward to dismantling the whole thing in 5 days from now. But that's my work. I'm 73. Thank you very much.